just finished a marathon meeting of the National Economic Council, and we're here to share some thoughts in terms of the key highlights of the deliberations. As you are aware, the National Economic Council is the highest advisory body on the economy to the president. And council met, and key issues on the table happen to be the topic of the moment. And that is how do we cushion the effects or the impacts of the PMS subsidy removal, as well as the convergence or the floating of the Naira on the citizens of Nigeria. And Council, I think every member, Council quite understands, deeply understands the impacts of the inevitable disruptive change that had to happen with regards to these two major changes that have happened. And we understand the impact on the 225 million Nigerians, especially in respect to price inflation, transport costs, food prices, on declining real incomes, and then, of course, job losses, impacts on businesses. And in fact, everybody is affected one way or the other. Even governments are also affected because the changes in exchange rate affects the stock of external debt in Naira terms, as well as debt service payments. And then also, of course, government also, the fuel vehicles and the rest. So we deliberated on all of this, and before today, the last NEC meeting, NEC had set up an ad hoc committee to evaluate these impacts and vis-a-vis the potential fiscal surplus that might be available. Because the first thing you do if you're asking government to do this is to ask how will government fund it. So we started our ad hoc committee had to do some estimate of the potential fiscal surplus that might arise as a consequence of these changes and, of course, improvements in the efficiency of revenue collection. Let me be clear that while we are also conscious of the fact that the economy needs a massive injection of resources, we face a paradox that we also have to be restraining because prices are also rising. There is a magnitude to which you pump in money into the system, and then inflation even gets higher. Exchange rate depreciates the more. And the more the exchange rate depreciates, the more there will be pressure for pump price of fuel to also rise. So Council is fully aware of all this. We're juggling many balls in the air at the same time. And consequently, I'm sure the first thing to really say is that contrary to the widely reported news item that FAC was going to distribute 1.9 trillion and so on trending, I think it's been agreed in order to moderate all of this, the possible impact of the shock on the system to distribute, I think, barely just 900 billion of that. And so it's not the 2 trillion that people have. But in thinking about how government should respond, federal, all the 3 tiers of government, Council also agreed that all the 3 tiers of government must do certain things, must begin to be, responsive to the mood of the nation, to the sufferings of the people, and try to do something to ameliorate the impacts. Obviously, each acting in accordance with its own fiscal space, in accordance with its own capacity to do so. While also we noted the need for governments at all levels to demonstrate empathy and, of course, be also part of being responsive is to aggressively address the issue of the cost of governance more broadly, generally sensitive to the times that we are in. And so, and in doing this, some principles were agreed to balance between investment and consumption, that if we have any fiscal surplus that is generated, that we must balance, have an appropriate balance between what part of it to consume in the immediate versus what proportion of it to invest for medium to longer term structural changes that we need to impact. And I think some of our colleagues will be addressing these aspects. And we also, the issue of a balance between this immediate need to push a lot of resources into the system versus the concept of sustainability. The pressure to make commitments. We'll be careful that we don't make commitments that will be difficult to unwind if some of the parameters change tomorrow. If oil price were to crash to $50 or to $30 tomorrow, meanwhile you have made some commitments that are difficult to begin to unwind immediately, we are also mindful of that. And consequently, quite a number of suggestions have been made in terms of how we go, part of which I would just run through quite a few of them, and my colleagues will be more than glad to then take up the others. For example, but before I hang up on that to let my colleagues to now take up the specifics of some of the specific suggestions we made, is one major item there in terms of now still talking about consumption and investment. And we agreed that there is a need for massive investment in infrastructure, that there is a huge infrastructure deficit across the land. And even Council agreed for the federal government interventions, for us to select some very major critical federal highways around the country, for immediate intervention. And then states and local governments as well to pay attention to several of these, and particularly that affect supply side of the economy. Something like investing in rural roads that get to agricultural areas and so on to boom up agri production, as the case may be. I think at this moment I'm to yield to my colleagues to take some other aspects of the key decisions that we, the Council, reached today. Thank you.